Hello, sir.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, good, sir. How are you?
Okay.
Good morning.
Hi, how are you?
Doing good.
Good. Just waiting for a few more people.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, Bradley,
Yeah.
when you make changes to the Google Doc, I get an email.
Okay.
But you don't get a copy of that, do you?
I just get I get an email when you make changes, but not
when
when I do. No.
Okay. Maybe I should look those over, because I think you missed some of my comments.
Oh, I think they're. Yeah, I'll look it over again, of course.
Okay, yeah, the problem is that Google Doc doesn't keep a record of the changes, as far as I can tell.
Oh.
Okay?
Okay.
So if you ignore a comment of mine, it just disappears.
Oh.
Okay, but I think I get a copy of it.
Oh.
Anyway, I'll check those files. See check it out. See if
I thought I went through all the comments. But...
Well, you seem to accept everything, and that's the problem.
Oh.
You accepted everything I did. Some of them are questions rather than changes.
Oh.
Okay. Let me see if I can figure it out.
All right.
Sir.
Yeah.
I just opened this blog post, this Google Doc that you've shared.
Yeah.
So I'm planning on reading it tonight, and also I've seen some other messages that you put me regarding information of this GSOC and also 2017 GSOC.
Yeah.
So probably I'll add it by tomorrow or at a max. I think I'll add it by tomorrow.
Okay. Yeah, just if you want to add something, you can just propose it and put it in the doc. And
can I just edit it? Can I just add it somewhere down the document and then ping you so that you can adjust where that information should go in the document?
Yeah, you can do that.
Yeah, sure. Okay, sir. Thanks.
Okay. Okay. I don't know if anyone else is coming. We might get started, and then if they come during the proceedings, and we can let them in, and they can catch up. So, welcome to today's DevoWorm ML meeting. I'm going to present on something called Computational Pareidolia, and then we'll talk about the pre-trained model. So Vinay, we can go through that in a little bit more detail. I worked on it yesterday, actually. Pulling in, basically fleshing out the outline. And so we can go over that. And then we can talk about what Vinay wants to add in more detail.
Yes, sure.
So let me share my screen. Alright, there we go. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So let's get started on this. Okay, so today's topic is computational pareidolia, and so this is an example of a painting that was made by something called style transfer which is where they take the style from one type of painting and they apply it to another or image. And this is an example of sort of like the sort of perceptual trick that you're pulling on the algorithm, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So what is pareidolia? Well, it's a Greek word that means beside or beyond form or image. So they combine, beyond the image or beyond the form. And the definition, according to Wikipedia, is interpreting a vague stimulus as something known to the observer. So you see these examples here. So you have Cookie Monster, where it's like a mouth, where the opening of this trash can is a mouth. They put eyes on it. And this power outlet looks like a face. And this coffee cup has foam in the shape of a face. Faces are actually quite common in pareidolia, although it can be other things as well. It can even be auditory information, such as songs that you interpret in some way that your brain prefers. And so this is well documented in human perception. But today I'm going to talk about how machine learning algorithms can either simulate this or even fall victim to it. So this is a good example. This isn't pareidolia necessarily, but it's an ambiguous image. And so ambiguous images are these images where you have this thing here on the left that is, it's a duck. It looks like a duck, but it also looks like a rabbit. So if you focus in on it the first time, you'll see either a duck or a rabbit. And then if you focus in the second time, you might see the other image. So you see a duck the first time, then you see a rabbit. So if you look at it kind of sideways, you can see the ears of the rabbit here. Or if you look at it this way, it's the bill of a duck. And so there are a lot of these ambiguous images. And in this case, this is Google Cloud Vision is actually able to interpret these ambiguous images in either way, depending on how you orient the image. So in this case, the computer algorithm is interpreting it in two different ways, depending on the orientation. And our visual systems do sort of the same thing. But we kind of understand how the visual system does it, but the computational system is replicating it. So I wrote a blog post on this a couple years back, so this is the link to it. And it's kind of a short post, but it has a couple of articles in it that kind of go over these different, maybe different ways that people have done this or musings that people have made about this. It's not something that's very common that people have thought about at least. So this is one example, though, of one of the applications that exists for this. So in this genetic algorithm, Pareto loop, they've actually taken this concept and turned it into a genetic algorithm that creates faces out of shapes. So in this case, you have a two-dimensional array with a bunch of geometric shapes, and they stack together in different ways. And then you use this genetic algorithm to select for things that look more and more like a face. So in this case, we have a bunch of polygons that are overlapping, and we select for the polygon overlaps that look most like a face, and eventually we get to something that approximates the Mona Lisa. So again, we have something that isn't organized. It's just random polygons stacked on top of one another with different shading characteristics, different shape characteristics, and they form this face.
Bradley, why do they form that particular face?
Well, they don't necessarily form it, on purpose. It's just that you have these shapes that are overlapping, and you do rounds of selection on the different shapes that look more like a face. So it's like you're kind of bootstrapping this face into existence from a bunch of different shapes being presented. So, it takes a while for this to converge, depending on the initial condition. But you get these different, sets of polygons that overlap, And, you get a population of these things in the first round, and then you select the ones that kind of look more like a face. So, if the second image here shows that you have some formation of like something that looks like a face and hair, and then you select for that, and then it breeds another set of similar images again, and then you select for this, and it breeds another set of images like this.
Now, I guess what I'm asking, why didn't it come up with your face?
What do you mean, my face?
Somewhere in here is the information that you're hunting for the Mona Lisa.
Yeah.
Where is it?
Well, you're just selecting on things. Yeah, it's just selecting on things that come more and more similar to the actual original image.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So in what step is the original image put in?
I think the first step. I think they're actually just using it from the first step, and they're using it as
okay. So this is kind of successive approximations to a known goal.
Yeah. So they're using a genetic algorithm, and the fitness function looks like the Mona Lisa. And then you basically take your first round of images. So you might have a population of 1,000 images that look different, and you say which ones look most like this original image, and then you select those, and then you produce a bunch of similar images to those. You make a reproduction step, and then you find the ones that are most closely related to the original image, and you do this iteratively.
So it is the program that decides which polygon would contribute to formation of a face, right?
Yeah, so in genetic algorithms, you have a population of different images, like a population of organisms. So, I don't know what their population size is for this. I can't remember, but, say it's like 10,000 images that have different, configurations of these polygons. And you take the original image and you say, this is the fitness function. So this is what I want to approximate. And then the images that are closer to that, get selected, and those that don't. So you get this, and it takes several hundred, maybe even thousands of iterations to get something that looks like the image on the far right.
Yeah, understood.
And it doesn't look exactly like the Mona Lisa, but our perceptual system is seeing it as that, and the algorithm is seeing it as such. So again, this might just be it actually is a bunch of random polygons. We're just interpreting it as a face. So the neuroscience of pareidolia is a bit different than that, of course. So here's an example: seeing Jesus in toast, neural and behavioral correlates of face pareidolia. This is described in this article as an interaction between our face recognition and our visual perception abilities. So in our brain, our attentional system uses these top-down mechanisms and these bottom-up mechanisms. So attentional processing is, both bottom-up, so you're finding random patterns in the environment and you're evaluating them. And then you have these top-down mechanisms, which are things like object recognition, face recognition. So you're taking these things that are random, and you're applying some sort of mental model to them. So how do you recognize someone's face? Well, some people argue that we have neurons that encode specific faces, but in general we can recognize a face more than we can recognize like some object. We have a stronger ability for that. We also have strong abilities for very familiar objects like pencils or mugs, things you see every day versus maybe things you don't see every day. And so because of that, we have this top-down mechanism that enforces some sort of order on all the sorts of things that we see in the environment. So faces, again, unlike other objects, are processed just as a whole thing. So you look at something and you either see a face or you don't. Sometimes it's not a face. I gotta let someone into the meeting here. Hi, Jesse. We were just in the middle of this talk, Computational Pareidolia. So I can go over it a little bit with you afterwards, but welcome. All right, so let me go back to this slide.
No.
Oh, okay, it's okay. So present. So faces are processed holistically. So like you see a face or you don't, and sometimes you falsely recognize things as faces as a result. So you look at a power outlet or an electrical outlet and it looks like a face, or you might look at like some set of clouds and they look like a face, but they're not faces. And the reason for that, of course, is this top-down attentional mechanism. And then I mentioned before that you can also have things like auditory stimuli that exhibit the same phenomenon. So I don't know if a lot of you have heard the thing about like misheard song lyrics, where you listen to song lyrics and you hear certain lyrics that are actually wrong. So that's another form of this pareidolia, where you're taking familiar things and you're sticking them into the ambiguous stimulus. So like you might hear if the musician is like saying things in interspersed with the beat of the music, you might misinterpret some of the lyrics as things that are more words that are maybe more familiar to you. So that's the neuroscience of it. And this is not the neuroscience of it, but this is how you can replicate it in a computer. You just simply, try to form something that looks like a face, and then it'll produce something that looks like a face. But it's not really, this isn't really a face. This is something that we recognize as a face. And for that matter, something a computer can recognize as a face. Because, if you put this into a face recognition algorithm, you might very well get a positive result. So this is, of course, what we're talking about here. When I say a false positive, and pareidolia is a false positive of like things like faces or shapes that you see in the environment. So here we have this Venn diagram. So you have true positives, which are this area here. This is if you see a face and it is a face. False negatives are things that are rejected as faces properly. So things you see and you say, no, that's not a face, that's not a face. False positives, of course, are this territory of pareidolia. So this is where you see some pattern and it looks like a face. And then true negatives are things that...
Okay. Bradley, let me make a comment. I think there's some problem here in the very language that's used to describe this, because the word false has a very strong connotation.
Yeah.
Okay? And let me give you an example where this mechanism is actually helpful to have a false positive.
Yeah.
Okay? And that is, you have to go back in evolution and think about predator-prey relations.
Yeah.
If I'm out in a jungle and I think I see a tiger.
Yeah.
Okay? It may be a false positive. However, it is better that I run even if it wasn't there.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Because if I run and it wasn't there, there's no harm. If I don't run and it wasn't there, I'm dead. If it was there, I'm dead. And therefore, what's called a false positive actually can be quite helpful.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So I'm saying the very use of the word false in describing these phenomena is a bias in our thinking about them.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it goes back to this part here where, you talk about how faces are processed holistically. So if you see something that's familiar, it's good to see something maybe that's familiar versus, not being able to tell what something is in the environment. If it's like a snake, then in the grass, and you see that, but it's not really a snake, then you benefit from that more than you don't. This is just kind of like the technical language of it, like in terms of...
I understand. I'm saying that there's a value judgment made in using the word false, which may not be appropriate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I know. It's like, and this is why I kind of gave this talk, because I wanted to see, this is interesting. We can elicit this effect in machines as well as humans. So,
Like we even have an English word for that. It's called jumpy.
oh
If you're
yeah,
jumpy, you react to things that you shouldn't necessarily react to.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
But it also means that you're more on guard.
yeah. So in in a more formal analysis of this, like when people study perception and they look at things in this framework, like say they'll take some signal like a tone or an image, and they'll say, is it something above or below threshold? Like, does it elicit some feeling or not? And people have a range of different like sensitivities to it. So some people are much more sensitive to some stimulus than others, and so they'll classify it as a tone even if most people don't. And so they can actually measure this on a curve as well, on a performance curve. So even in people, it's highly variable in terms of what they're responding to. And so again, yeah, it's not necessarily a false thing, but it's like, it's just the way we recognize patterns. So, but we can also, these kind of things can also be elicited by malicious actors. And so, you can create, say, stimuli in a machine learning context that where you produce something that looks like maybe a face. Maybe you want to replicate fingerprints, or you want to replicate a face for some reason to fool what they call, again, when they use these terms, they do sort of connotate certain things, but they're just using them as a stand-in for different things that they want to convey. So why deep learning AIs are so easy to fool is one example of an article where they show this sort of thing. They call it, they think of it in terms of model brittleness versus model robustness. But you could think of it in terms of model, some sort of pareidolia response is
Yeah.
model robustness, depending on what you want to do with it.
The plant world does this too. If you take your pitcher plants, which attract insects, the insect supposedly thinks it's finding food and it gets eaten.
Yeah. So, but these are a bunch of articles that talk about this topic. So this is the interaction of this sort of pareidolia effect, and people actually attacking systems like deep learning models and AIs for different things. This Houdini fooling deep structured prediction models is kind of interesting. Then this ADFAT, real world adversarial attack on ArcFace. So there's a thing in computer science called adversarial attack, which is where you use some sort of, fault, what we might call false positive data set, to sort of flood the zone in the algorithm with false examples. So sometimes you can use adversarial techniques to improve the model, such as in a GAN, but in this case they're using it to sort of elicit false results in a Face ID system, which is if you want to recognize faces correctly every time is a bad thing. But if you want to create a system that produces faces for art or something like that, it's actually a good thing. So, you can use these things in different ways, but this phenomenon can be elicited in machines. And those are some examples of cases where that's so. So, here's another example. This is actually from this Nature article. Deep learning AIs are so easy to fool. This is an image from that article. And they talk about actually using DNNs and being able to rotate objects to confuse DNNs. And again, DNNs are really, dependent on this sort of false positive, true positive system of classification. So if you have this, you can actually rotate images, like we saw in slide 2, where we looked at the duck and the rabbit illusion. In this case, you can rotate objects, and you can elicit different responses from the system. So here we have a stop sign, and this is generally the orientation that we see stop signs at when we drive down the street, or when a self-driving car drives down a street. Probably more importantly for this example, you have the stop signs right side up. It's a little tilted maybe. It turns out if you tilt it sideways, you get something called it recognizes it as a dumbbell, which is, not what it is, but that's how it's recognizing it. And then if you set it to the side and squish it, you do this rotation of the image and you skew the letters, it actually recognizes it as a racket. So it's recognizing all these things out of one image if you just change the orientation of the shape. And this, of course, is also, you can see, like from the Mona Lisa example, where, if you have these shapes that are kind of, squished or combined in different ways, you can elicit certain responses. And then, in the nervous system, but also in a neural network. Again, then we have these other examples. So you have, this is an insect, a moth, and it's sitting on a table cover.
No, it's a dragonfly.
Dragonfly, okay.
You missed it. Okay.
Sorry. It's early. Sorry. And so it's sitting on this surface, and I don't know how it's detecting a manhole cover, maybe from the table back underneath this mat, but it's recognizing it as such. And then this is my favorite, a mushroom that's kind of twisted, and it's kind of laying sideways, and that's classified as a pretzel. I guess because it's twisted like this. So you get this sort of effect where if you change the orientation of these things, you change the identity of it. At least what the algorithm uses the identity. So the caption here is even natural images can fool a DNN because it might focus on the picture's color, texture, background rather than picking out the salient features. So the salient features, actually the way we process objects is a little bit different as well than faces. You're picking out certain features in the image, like corners or letters, and the relationship between those. And so here we can actually see how that could be manipulated or changed.
Bradley,
Yeah.
It seems maybe what's missing from the DNNs is what's called mental rotation.
Oh, okay.
There's a whole body of research going back decades on mental rotation. And for example, if you took the stop sign, the middle example, or even the right example, the amount of time it takes you to recognize that a stop sign is longer if you have to rotate it back to a standard orientation in your brain. And you can actually measure this. So I would suggest that the difference here is we recognize it, but first we do rotate it to a canonical position.
Okay.
And maybe that's what's lacking in DNNs. They don't do this mental rotation.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because, they don't do that on their own. There are ways that you can train these models so that they recognize things at different orientations.
Yeah, but that's not the same.
Yeah, it's not the same thing.
That's not the same as testing. If you can, you see, for instance, if you take one way that people test this idea is you take an image of something that whose mirror image is not the same as the object, like two hands, and then you present this at an oddball angle, and you ask, is it the same or is it the mirror image? And the time it takes a person to make a decision depends on the angle it's been rotated. Yeah. And so there's actually seems to be a rotation algorithm going on in your brain that iterates until it sees if it can make a match or not. And that's not the same as being presented with the object at many different orientations, so you can just select that it's there.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm suggesting is that maybe what DNNs need is the addition of mental rotation software.
Yeah, I think that's true. Because in a DNN or maybe like in any neural network, you really have to train it in that way. So, you know, you might get a good set of results if the images are at one orientation, but if they're in different contexts, different backgrounds even, they'll have the same problem.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is in mental rotation, you recognize the object enough to know that it has a canonical representation, and then you will take to see if it actually is that image is the canonical one or not.
Yeah.
Whereas if I just have 100 images at 100 different angles and I just have to select which one, that's very different from doing a mental rotation.
Yeah.
A very different operation.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Have you seen anything on simulated mental rotation in DNNs?
I've not run across. I didn't really search for that specific thing, but I don't know of any examples.
Okay.
The only thing I know is that they do have problems with like generalizing data. So it really is like, from what I know, is that people, unless they train them specifically for that, but no one has come up with an algorithm that has like a separate module for mental rotation.
Okay.
So those are all the slides I have for that. Do we have any questions in the? Let's see. We have some things in the chat here. So, okay, Vinay says there has been some research on this topic. Can deep networks learn invariance? So that's the link in the chat. And so they call it learning invariance. How it should be, AGI actually they're talking about here, how it should be able to learn and recognize new classes of objects from as few examples as possible. So, I mean, if people want to go through this and read it, it looks pretty interesting. So they've done some experiments with this. Okay,
Can you put the link in the chat?
Yeah, it should be right there. Let me make a link.
Thank you.
So they have something called spatial transformers. Current models capable of learning spatial transformations to make recognition models invariant to them. So they have to know the class of transformations in advance for this. But then that doesn't solve your problem if you run into things that you don't know. So if you have a set of transformations like rotations around a circle, you know what those are, but if you squish it and stretch it out, that might not be something it'll recognize. So you have to train in advance of all those things as a separate module, and then it would work. This is always a tricky problem, trying to find things that generalize. It finally conforms. Okay. So that's all I have for that presentation. So Jesse missed the first part of it. But did you have any questions about it? Any thoughts? Yeah. The rotation models perform poorly as the rotation degree increases.
So
Yeah.
I don't have any questions, but actually learned a lot of new topics here. I know them, but I not know that there's a research topic behind these kinds of ambiguities. So thanks for that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're welcome. I mean, it's not really so much a research topic as like just a thing that we can observe in nature, and then we also observe in algorithms. I mean, like I gave you a paucity of references for it, so I don't really think it's built. That was like a couple years ago when I did that blog post, and I don't think since then. I was looking it up. As I was doing this talk, and I didn't see much more than that out there. So it's definitely an open area. These are the slides here. Definitely an open area. People are interested in thinking about it more. I don't think people have talked about it too much. That's the thing about like a lot of machine learning research is that there are a lot of like topics that kind of come from human cognition that kind of apply to these models because we're not recreating a nervous system necessarily, but we're creating the conditions for cognition. And so there are a lot of things in cognition that are really interesting that pop up in these models that no one's really thought about too much. So and Jesse, did you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, it's interesting phenomenon. I didn't know they had a name.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's like the term pareidolia, they use it in cognition. But then when they talk about it in computers, it's slightly different. Like, so if you found someone who studied visual perception, they might say, well, that's not pareidolia. That's something else. But, point taken, but they don't really have a better word for it. So,
Okay.
Why don't we switch gears then and talk about so Dick and I were working on the digital basilaria paper. And so what are your thoughts on that? I saw you send an email about splitting or having a series of 2 papers.
Oh, the second paper would be on psychoanalysis of basilaria.
Okay.
What is the individual basilaria cell thinking, and how is it group behavior is different from that of the individual?
Oh, yeah.
Well, in other words, I think what we're headed for here is that the single colony is actually an organism.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which fits with the original description about an unusual creature on the beach. An unusual animal on the beach.
Yeah.
Okay? So I think all the business about trying to figure out what algorithm is the individual cell doing so that it can cooperate with all the others to produce these different, what you call dynamic phenotypes.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's what I see as the second paper.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Okay.
Yeah. But like in this paper, do you think it needs more anything like specifically that we are missing?
Well, the only thing that I saw missing is that for the person who is not familiar with state-of-the-art in image processing, it would be nice to take one image and you talk about a number of steps that it goes through, show the result, all the intermediate stages at the end.
Okay.
Okay, I think that's the only thing I saw that's missing, so that one could see how the algorithm is through the various steps ends up producing the result we're after, at least in most cases, and also show where it fails. You pointed out that if the cells are all strung out so they're almost in a line, you kind of lose it.
Yeah.
Okay?
And we
Now,
yeah.
The other thing that's missing is I didn't quite understand why you kept using the word static.
Oh, just because we're not. Yeah.
I took it out, but what did you mean?
Oh, I guess just the individual images are static. Like.
Oh, okay. In that sense, yeah, that's a single frame from a movie is not static. It's just a single time point.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not static. Because static implies it doesn't change over time.
Oh, okay.
Okay, that's why I guess that's what was bothering me. It's a single frame from
Yeah.
a movie. But what is not used is the information, for example, that the number of cells is the same from one frame to the next. And therefore, one could say if the number of frames has changed, one of two things has happened. The algorithm screwed up, or there's been a cell division.
Right.
Okay? So a higher order algorithm would take into account consecutive frames and the number of cells that it gets and say, okay, can I correct a frame based on the frame before and the frame after it, unless I think I detected a cell division.
Right.
Now, a cell division, I think, could be detectable by the cells getting wider.
Yeah.
In other words, the width rather than the length would increase. So I think that you could actually possibly objectively determine that a cell is going through the cell division process. And that should actually take a long time compared to the time it takes for the whole colony to move back and forth.
Yeah.
Okay. So the amount of time it takes is for a cell division is also a criterion for it being a cell division.
Okay.
So I guess that would require plotting the width of a cell versus time and looking to see if it's changing for some of the cells and not for others.
Yeah.
And then you could also ask fun questions like, are the cell divisions synchronized in any sense?
Yeah.
Or are they random with respect to one another?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So so you can get these higher orders, but by I think a little bit of discussion about how one might incorporate the time-dependent or time-independent parameters that could be used to correct a single frame.
Yeah.
Okay, that I wouldn't put it in this paper because it's probably a lot of work by itself, but just future work section or something.
Yeah. Just to point it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought the end probably needed some more detail, but I didn't know exactly how to go about doing that. But I think I know now.
Okay, I used to have a strong interest in mental rotation. I've got a list of 40 papers or so here.
Okay.
Anybody interested in seeing it?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, I'll put it together. Can I send a file here or no?
No, but we can exchange it via email.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll send it. Okay, I'll send it to you when you distribute it or incorporate it into it.
Yeah,
Okay?
that sounds good. Yeah.
It's not. Well, okay. I'll tell you what. When we're done, I'll take the time to bring it up to date so you have a thorough one.
Oh, okay. That sounds good. Yes, that would be a good resource. Thank you.
Yeah, good. I haven't looked at this since 2014.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's always like you always have these things you go back to, and then like they have to be updated.
Yeah, I mean the latest article I've got, for instance, is on gender differences in mental rotation processing speed.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Something like that.
Yeah. So we get yeah. So yeah, I mean that's good. Thank you for the update on the paper. And so, what's the deadline for submission, or do we have an upcoming deadline?
Well, we're trying to get the book to publisher by the end of December, so we got to leave some time for a review.
Yeah.
I'd say push it. It would be nice to submit it within a couple of weeks. Okay. So, in fact, I think we're pretty close. I'd like to submit by October 28th if possible, because we got a meeting coming up on that date with the editors to discuss things.
Okay.
But if we can't make that, I'll just tell them we'll get it soon.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So so I'd say if it's practical, aim for the 28th.
Okay. Yeah.
Or 27th, maybe 27th.
Yeah. That's coming up.
Okay.
That's
Which is 4 days away. Okay. Yeah, the meeting's next Monday.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So Jesse said, about the two papers. So these are what we were referring to as the digital bacillary papers. This is from the other group that I was working with this summer. Jesse was in the Bradenburg Vehicles group, but we also had the precursor to this group, which was the Google Summer Code machine learning group. And then we had the one group working on digital basilaria, and that's the paper that this is based on. So I presented on that like in week 2 of the DevoWormML group, Jesse, where we have these algae that are these diatoms that have a bunch of filaments that slide together in a colony, and we're analyzing images of those organisms. So, and then Dick proposed, having like a second paper to follow up on this one, but that's something that would be later on. And so, that's what you get when you do research. You get more research from the research that you've already done. So, yeah.
Oh, by the way, has Thomas Harbich had a look at it yet?
No, I'll send it to him and see what
Okay.
he thinks.
I'd say it's getting to the point where he could go over it.
Yeah. Because I think I have to point it out to him specifically. Yeah, I don't think he's seen it though.
Okay, so.
Okay. So I wanted to talk in the last part of the meeting about the pre-trained models blog post. So I actually worked on fleshing this out. I'm going to present the screen. So actually, let me put the link to the document in the chat, so we have a common reference point here. And this is the blog post I talked about. This is actually from the pre-trained models discussion we've had in the group. And Vinay and I were talking about this yesterday. So this last week I was able to flesh out a lot of the details that last week I presented an outline, and this week I've got a draft here. And so the outline was based on 3 different sets of topics, and we're heading towards a 1,500 word limit. So right now I think we're at 750 or 800 words. So we're well within our limit. So we have room for people to contribute things if they want. So this just starts out with an introduction to pre-trained models, and this could use some work. I just gave a couple of examples here, and we talk a little bit about what the advantages are for biologists, and then a vision for sort of a developmental biology specific model. And so we kind of contemplate what the advantages of such a pre-trained model might be. So there are a couple of features of developmental systems that are bullet pointed here that are relevant. I got these off the top of my head, so if you can rephrase these, or if you want to change them or add to them, that would work as well. But I was basing these points on the just general things in developmental biology that are unique to that type of system. Maybe not unique, but like definitely need to be addressed. Like cell division and differentiation events, the ability to identify a cell when it divides, when it replicates, but also as it's replicating. So to be able to identify features like that. Then we have some discussion about models not equaling phenomenology, which is, has implications for the model. And I kind of wrote that out a bit. And then this is the part that I'm not done with yet. I'm going to work on later, kind of giving some practical examples. And that's, like, again, as I told Vinay, this is a place where we can bring a lot of the stuff to bear from, say, like the Google Summer Code, and also some of practical examples from actual data sets. So we might create a hypothetical set of biological images in our head, or we might think about a process or something. I'm not quite sure what it'll look like, but I know Vinay said he was going to work on it today and tomorrow. And then Jesse and Dick, if you want to contribute to this, you're welcome, but you're not required to do so. Just even going over it and making corrections would be helpful too, because we're trying to get this published. We're going to publish this on the Node, which is the developmental biology blog, maybe sometime this or next week. So we want to kind of wrap this up fairly quickly. So if we can get some feedback, it would be great, or some contributions, that would be great as well. Yeah, Jesse, thanks. Yeah, definitely take a look at it, and even if you just want to do some copy editing, that's welcome, and I appreciate your input. So I mean, I think we, again, like, this is based on the outline that we had. Oh, Dick fell out of the meeting.
Yeah, I fell out. Something's wrong with my router.
Oh, okay. So I was just talking about this pre-trained model blog post, and if you want to look it over and have any suggestions, or copy editing suggestions, or whatever, that's welcome. We're going to try to put it out on this blog, the Node, which is a developmental biology blog, by maybe like the beginning of next week. So, and then we might do another blog post later on in the year. I'm not sure yet. We'll see how this one goes over. I hope that we can get some people to read it and get interested in it. This will be definitely one of the, I mentioned the group on the Node, and I don't know how many people saw the post, but I'd like to keep them updated a little bit on what we've been talking about. So, so yeah, that would be good if people want to go over that. Again, if Dick missed the link, this is the link to the document. And so, Vinay, did you have any questions? You actually had asked me specifically about this yesterday.
Yeah, so as you shared the link now, so tonight I plan on reading this, and then I'll let you know if I have any doubts. So, like, I want to get an idea of how the content should look like what are the types we can add, what are the extra content that we can add, so that the reader gets a practical view as well. So first I plan on reading the entire document, then I'll get the flow of how to continue this, and then probably I'll add like when I was in this summer, I came across some pre-trained models for, especially for the medical field, like let's say for brain scan images, or any segmentation kind of images, for especially for the healthcare, from the healthcare field. So I'll actually try to dig those back up, and then I'll probably add some introductions to those models, and then I'll provide the links to them.
Yeah.
That's what I plan to do.
Yeah. So yeah, one more point about that. We have like the text, which is, so what I've learned from doing blog posts is you want to keep the descriptions brief in the main part of the blog post. Like if you can do something, you can make a brief description of something, that's good. But for more detailed things, we have like an appendix area, which is this resources section. So actually I found this one, the Model Zoo, which is a nice little reference on different pre-trained models for a wide variety of things. But we can also put like resources for like different specific models and kind of annotate it. So we like mention the model, mention what it's used for, and then provide a link, and then have like a list of those down here. That way people can like go through the blog post really quickly, read it, digest it, and then they go down and they can find some references and some resources, and they don't have to have it in the way when they're reading it. I find blogs that people are very impatient when they read blog posts. They want to get cut to the chase, and then you'll have the resources at the end. So I just found that to be a good strategy for that. So I mean, keep that in mind when you're going through these examples. If it's something that maybe you want to put in the resources section, or actually like you explain it in the text, if you can do maybe in a couple sentences, summarize it, then that's fine. But otherwise, we might put it in that latter section. So
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
yeah. Okay. Did anyone else have any questions about it, or Jesse, did you have any thoughts about it? Okay, yeah. I mean, yeah, take a look and then, Slack me or email me about it. And yeah, that's good. So yeah, that's good. Well, I think that's our meeting for today, unless anyone has any other things they want to mention. We're at the top of the hour. Okay. Well, okay. Well, thanks for attending. Next week is open. We don't have anything. Yeah, thanks, Jesse. We don't have anything on the schedule, so if you want to